Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Shweta Goswami. I'm the Medical Director of Zeeva Fertility. We're based out of Noida and Delhi NCR. Today I want to discuss with you an important topic which is a part of an important decision making during the IVF procedure, that whether we should think about a day 3 transfer or a day 5 or a blastocyst transfer. Now, we need to first understand what happens in the lab. Why are we talking about day 3? What is blastocyst? Briefly, to understand that. So basically, in the IVF procedure, we would have bypassed a lot of the natural steps, got the eggs and sperms out, and therefore the IVF success rate primarily now depends on whether we have good quality embryos or not. And therefore the IVF procedure in the lab, the culturing of the embryos, becomes an important aspect of embryo selection, that which are the embryos that make sense. We might have 10, 15, 18 eggs that we could have retrieved, but we know at the end of the journey, by culturing in the lab, we'll get to know the best few. It could be 2, it could be 8, depending on how many of them are healthy. But it's all about embryo selection, that which of the embryos are best. Now, in a typical IVF cycle, for example, if somebody gets about 12 eggs, these numbers keep going down. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just that we need to understand by nature, culturing the embryos, that which one of them actually makes sense. So you have 12 eggs to start with, maybe 10 were mature, 9 fertilized. Then these 9 are then further cultured till day 3, because then they start dividing. They become 2 cell, 4 cell, 8 cell, 10 cell embryo on day 3. And the grading of these embryos, or the quality of the embryos as seen under the microscope, is divided into grade A, B, C, which helps us to know that, okay, what is the quality of the embryos that we are looking at here. Now, typically, as I said, if you have 9 fertilized embryos, you'll probably have 7, 8 embryos that are culturing well on day 3. And then you could either decide to transfer them the same day, or you could do an extended culture, which is called blastocyst. So in the body also, the embryos keep growing inside the fallopian tube till about day 5, which is the blastocyst stage, after which they enter the uterus. Now, earlier, for maybe the first 20-25 years of IVF, it was all day 3 transfer that was done, because we weren't so confident of our lab still. We would just transfer back embryos in 2-3 days. We wouldn't want to take the risk of culturing them to day 5. Maybe they wouldn't survive. So we would put them all back in. So similarly, in today's situation, if we think the lab is not confident of culturing to the blastocyst stage, all embryos should certainly be transferred at day 3, because then at least the embryos go back to the womb where they belong. Also, if somebody, say for example, has 2-3 embryos only on day 3, then taking it to day 5 will not increase their success rate, which is a very important thing we need to understand, because now we've started to understand that blastocyst is standard of care. But the reason for that is primarily the number of embryos that you have of good quality on day 3. So for example, we have 8 great looking embryos on day 3, but we are going to transfer only 2 or maximum 3 for anybody, because otherwise it's going to put you on a very high risk of multiple pregnancy. In such a patient, in today's date and world, if the lab conditions are good, we would want to culture them further for 2 days, because nature would then select them further. We know that only 40-50% of them will reach the blastocyst stage. That's how it is. And therefore, out of those 7, 8, you'd get to know which are the best 2, 3, 4. You would have another grading of blastocysts to go for, and therefore we would know much better which are the 1 or 2 or maximum 3 embryos that we want to put back. In fact, if you would transfer 3 or maybe 4 embryos on day 3, you wouldn't transfer more than 1 or 2 at the blastocyst stage, which also helps to bring down the multiple pregnancy rate. At the same time, however, suppose somebody has only 3 embryos, right? You could still take it to blastocyst stage, but you would transfer 3 on day 3 of cycle. You might take them to day 3 or day 5 and get to know which are the best 2, and therefore cut down but bring down to do best 2 embryos. But suppose somebody has only 1 or 2 embryos, then even if you take them to blastocyst stage, you would still be transferring those embryos. So we need to understand the blastocyst culturing will not increase our success rate. The one advantage it would give is that it would give us more information. A lot of embryos look A grade, look excellent on day 3, but do not move on to the blastocyst stage. And if you do not get a pregnancy, unfortunately, in that cycle, then the understanding is very clear. We didn't have very good embryos, because IVF is a science where you have, say, at max a 70-30 success rate. You also have to think ahead and say, okay, God forbid if we don't get pregnant, we need to know answers. Everybody of us wants to look for answers. We want to understand why did it not work? Was it an embryo issue? Was it the uterus that was not receptive? And therefore, culturing them further to day 5 does give information on whether the embryos did reach blastocyst, what was their grading at that stage. But as a patient, you need to be very clear and understand the success rate wouldn't change. It's just more information that you would get. Also, there is another risk of culturing to day 5 that you could see that they are not growing to day 5 and therefore even realize there's no point of embryo transfer. So if somebody has usually already done transfers before, especially if they've been day 3, they've been excellent looking embryos, but they've not resulted in a pregnancy, and the remaining embryos then must be taken to the blastocyst stage, because if they're not culturing to the blastocyst stage, then whether we like it or not, there's no point in transferring such cycles. So, each one of them, day 3, day 5, does have their advantages. If you have lesser number of embryos, the whole theory is, why are we culturing them further? Why not put them back into the womb, and maybe the success rates could be better. Also, some people want to do sequential transfer. They transfer 1 or 2 embryos on day 3 and then 1 or 2 on day 5. They want to give the advantage of both. There are others who think it's, if you've done a day 3 doesn't work, do a day 5 or vice versa. So if you take all embryos to day 5, you lose that advantage also. So basically trying to say that one size would not fit all. For every patient, we need to individualize very importantly at this stage and try and come to the conclusion that whether we should do a day 3 transfer, whether we should do a day 5 transfer, and maybe even in between different cycles, take a different decision on what needs to be done. What is standard consensus is that if you have a good number of embryos, then it makes perfect sense to take them to day 5, because otherwise you're just looking at very healthy embryos on day 3 which all look the same and you don't know which ones to transfer. But when you have average number of embryos, you could keep debating between a day 2, day 3 or a day 5 transfer. So blastocyst transfer, therefore, in any good responder with very good quality embryos would be the standard of care. But it does not mean that everybody needs a day 5 transfer. It also comes in with extra work in the lab. It also comes in therefore with extra costs. And therefore, I think that also needs to be taken into the picture when we are trying to ascertain what we need to do. But I hope these 3-4 points would be helpful for you in trying to assess whether you should go ahead for a day 3 or a day 5, which is an extended culture or a blastocyst transfer. All the very best, and thank you.